Hello everyone. For this video, I want to talk about the sample literary analysis essay that I gave you, that essay about Pokemon, which was a student essay. It was a student wrote for me a couple of years ago. But yeah, let's get into this essay about Pokemon. I want us to read this as an example of a literary analysis essay. This isn't a perfect essay. There's some problems with it, and I'm gonna talk about that in this video. And I asked you guys to think about that for your discussion board. But it is a literary analysis essay. Even if we disagree with it, even if there's parts of it that I think are a little bit off, it still is this sort of essay because it does the main thing a literary analysis essay needs to do, which is that it makes an argument about a message the text is sending. So let's get into the thesis here. Obviously, the topic that they're looking at is kind of like animal cruelty or animal rights, and they're asking the question, what does Pokemon have to say about animal cruelty or animal rights? So I think we get their thesis in the first paragraph, the second to last sentence, where they say these Pokemon are a resemblance of real life animals and sends the message that animal captivity is okay. So their argument here is that the message that Pokemon sends is that animal captivity, animal cruelty is okay. That's the argument that they're going with. So again, you could disagree with this, but it is an argument about a message the text is sending, which is the main thing that I want to make sure that you guys get out of these next couple of videos. So the argument here kind of relies on a comparison between Pokemon to real life animals. And I've had students say before, well, this is made up, Pokemon aren't real, so how could it be sending this message if it's this kind of fantasy, fictional thing? And I think when we're looking at art, the messages that art sends, it's always kind of metaphorical like this, where it's about Pokemon, but the message it sends has to do with real animals. I mean, first of all, a lot of Pokemon are just kind of like weird animals, like a lot of Pokemon are just like, what if there was a frog that was weird, or like what if there was like a really crazy turtle? So a lot of Pokemon are like clearly based on animals, like Squirtle or something like that. But other than that, I think just the way that Pokemon behave, the fact that they can't speak human languages, they can only say their names, the way they behave in the wild, just kind of roaming around forests and looking for food and stuff. I don't think it's going too far to say no, that's very much like real world animals, Obviously they have like special powers and stuff, and they can breathe fire and things like that. But it is like they are like real world animals in a lot of ways that I think there is evidence to say that based on the show. So once we kind of make that, once we establish that, then we say, well, isn't this show just kind of like they say in the essay in the second paragraph, they say this definitely reminds me of dog fighting, where dogs are forced into bloody battle for their trainer's amusement. Um, so yeah, that kind of becomes the next question then. If these are like real animals, then isn't the battling and fighting of them, isn't that something like dog fighting or cockfighting or that kind of stuff that we see in the real world? Where it's I think a lot of the times we would look at that as being kind of abusive to the animals or whatever, at least not totally fair to the animals. So that I think is kind of the basis of their argument, is it kind of looking metaphorically at animals, at Pokemon as animals. But in any book that you've read, like if you guys ever read like Animal Farm or something like that in school, the way they always teach Animal Farm is that it's like a kind of metaphor for like the Russian Revolution or something. So when literature sends messages, it's always in this kind of metaphorical way. I just want to go through some of the other evidence that they have. Um, on the second page in the middle paragraph, uh, they quote from something that says the amount of time that Pokemon spend stuffed in Pokeballs is akin to how elephants are chained up in train carts waiting to be let out to perform. So that's another example that they give, evidence that they give from the text is the whole thing of Pokemon being kept in Pokeballs. That you have to capture them into Pokeballs, and true, we don't know exactly what it's like inside of a Pokeball. I don't think they ever definitively show us, but I think we have to question, like, how come Pikachu doesn't want to go in a Pokeball? It seems like Pikachu is one of the smarter Pokemon. He's able to communicate with humans, I think, more than the other ones. But he hates the Pokeball, refuses to go into it. And I think it's like, yeah, it does kind of seem like a cage from that point of view. And then they just, another thing to consider is just like in the show, the Pokemon like faint or whatever, or like in like the Game Boy game that I used to play on Game Boy Color, they would like faint and you'd have to take them to the hospital. But it's like, okay, so you're telling me that none of these Pokemon have like, sustained injuries that like last for a long time, or that like no Pokemon has ever died in battle. I've had students tell me before that there is an episode where a Pokemon dies. I think it's like if a Charmander has like their tail, the fire on their tail like blown out, that they die or something like that. So like Pokemon, can die, and I don't know exactly what the healthcare system is, wherever Pokemon is taking place. But it's like, okay, if your Pokemon gets a broken arm, like what do you do about that? They seem to heal very quickly, but still something to think about, right? Another point that they make here, I think this is actually an interesting point. Um, that they also say on the second page is that Pokemon are not meant to be captured, but instead exist for their own reasons. So this is something that I think you do hear a lot from like animal rights, or people who are against like eating meat and stuff like that. Is that like the view that we usually take of animals is kind of a human centric view, where like we look at animals as only existing to help humans, either by humans eating them or by, having them like the way that horses used to be used to pull carriages, or the way animals used to be used on farms to like pull plows and stuff like that. That we tend to view animals only in their relation to humans, to see animals as useful or worthwhile only in the ways that they help humans, or do stuff for us. So you can look at this and say that this is kind of like a human centric view of the world, where we look at animals and also as nature as just kind of being there to help humans and for us to do with them whatever helps us the most. And I think a lot of animal rights people would say, well, no, animals exist for their own reasons that maybe we just don't understand. Like when we look at a deer like grazing in a meadow or something, we're like, oh, look at this guy just wasting time, just wandering around, just doing nothing. But maybe that's just not how it is for them. Maybe for them that is like fulfilling their purpose or something like that. I think it's something about humans where we think we understand the purpose of everything, but again, animal rights people would say, well, maybe animals exist for their own reasons that maybe we don't understand. Maybe it's outside of our comprehension what animals are supposed to be doing, or maybe they're not supposed to be doing anything. Maybe them just hanging out in a field and hunting and having children and whatever. Maybe that's their life, and that's all it needs to be. So yeah, it's a very kind of human-centric view of the world, where we look at animals as only there for our use or for our entertainment, maybe when it comes to fighting them. I also wonder about the kind of economics of battling Pokemon. Like they have these badges, and you become the gym leader or whatever, and it's like I feel like there's money tied up in all of this. Obviously dog fighting, cockfighting, that's always about like gambling. Like you're gonna tell me that there's no DraftKings sportsbook for betting on the Pokemon battles? Like there is. People are betting on these Pokemon battles. Um, so I just wanted to go over some of the evidence. So again, you can still disagree with this author's argument, and that's fine, because again, there's always more than one interpretation when it comes to art. There's not just one answer. But they do have evidence to back up what they're saying. They have Pokeballs. They have um, uh, like the comparison between animals and Pokemon to begin with. And then yeah, this thing where it's just kind of a human centric view of the world. There is evidence from the show that they're using to make this argument, right? Which is why I think this is, agree with it or not, still a fairly decent literary analysis essay. Okay, let me get to the one thing I really don't like about this essay. So like they kind of sneak in these couple of paragraphs. Oh, another piece of evidence that they give is the presence of like breeders in the show. Like specifically Brock in the TV show is like a breeder where he's interested in like mating the Pokemon and getting this. Which again, like this now it just really feels like we're talking about animals and like the way that like race horses are bred and that kind of thing. So that's another piece of evidence directly from the show that they give. Okay, the part of this essay that I just kind of disagree with, I would say, is this on the last page, the second to last paragraph, where they try to make this argument that like watching Pokemon could make children like more aggressive or more likely to abuse animals in their own life. Um, they say, a study done shows the correlation between children behavior and the TV shows they're exposed to. Well, it proves that early TV viewing is strongly linked to later aggressive behavior, even when other factors are taken into consideration. I just kind of fundamentally disagree with this. At least like if what they're trying to say is that like watching a bad show, watching a show with like a bad message is gonna like make you more evil. That I just don't think is true. I don't think you're gonna watch Pokemon and then get turned into an animal abuser. I just don't think that's how it works. Obviously, a lot of us, I'm sure, watched Pokemon and then didn't become animal abusers, so we can testify to this ourselves. But I think if people try to like make this too simple, where they try to see like a direct uh, influence or correlation between like what you watch and then how you behave, I remember this from when I was growing up, when it was like a thing with my friends and our group and our parents of like whether or not we were allowed to play Grand Theft Auto, because obviously Grand Theft Auto is just a game about murdering people and stealing money from them and stealing cars and crashing them and all the things like that. And so they would say, oh well, do we want our kids to be exposed to these messages? Well, what if our kids become murderers then? Or like this was something like that was honestly used like I was born in like the early 90s, so when I was like 10 years old, like the early 2000s, like Columbine was still like a thing that people thought about a lot, and like was still like a big thing in the culture, even though it happened like in the 90s or whatever, which obviously Columbine was like one of the first big like school shootings, like the way that now they just kind of happen all the time. um but it was a big thing of people trying to say, well, oh, how could Columbine happen? They're like, well, how this could happen? And one of their explanations was, oh, these violent video games. Look what they're doing to kids when you have, when kids are playing Duck Hunt or whatever people were playing in like the early '90s, and then like, oh, it's making our kids so violent they're going to be school shooters or something. And I just think that that's kind of ridiculous. I just think that it's going too far. And I think that that kind of thinking leads you down a road where you end up with like censorship, and I'm just really against the idea of any art being censored. So I would definitely just push back against the idea in this essay that art is going to like brainwash people and like turn them evil or something like that. It reminds me, I don't know if you guys would remember this, but I think this was back in the '80s. They called in a bunch of musicians to Congress because like their music had lyrics that they thought were too whatever, too sexual or too violent or something. And Congress like called in like these rappers and these rock and roll people and were like, hey, like you're gonna ruin the kids, and all of them were like, I don't give a fuck. um, and it was actually that because of these like congressional things, that's how we ended up with the explicit label on CDs, which isn't even a thing anymore because people don't buy CDs. But like, if you've ever seen a CD that has like that little label in the corner where it's like explicit content, that's because of this kind of stuff. So yeah, I just can't really get down with this kind of idea that art is just going to brainwash people. I think the messages that art sends, like I think that they do matter, and I don't think they're totally insignificant. But I think that it's like there's a lot of good art that might have a bad political message. I think I said this in the other video, but take like any action movie from the '80s that's all about like how great America is and how bad everywhere else is or something. And it's like, well, some of those are still good movies, even if they have messages that might have been sort of like propaganda or something like that. So even for me, I don't know if I totally agree with the argument of this essay that Pokemon sends this message about that animal cruelty is okay. But even if I agreed with that, I would still resist this part of it that it's going to like brainwash people or something. So I don't think we need to think about it this way. I'm gonna have a video for you probably next week that'll offer maybe a different way of thinking about these messages as mattering and as being important, but without making it like a brainwashing thing where it's like if you guys have ever seen Clockwork Orange, where they like tape the guy's eyelids open and like show him all these videos, and then well, in that one they're trying to turn him good actually, so they turn him good by showing him the stuff in there. I just don't think that that's how it works. So what I really wanted to get this from this essay, and again, so that part of the essay I think is just kind of a little ridiculous. But the reason I want us to read this is because, for better or worse, it is a literary analysis essay. It makes an argument about a message that the show is sending. So I want you guys to keep this in mind as we move forward the next couple of weeks, and when we start trying to write our own essay. the way that they're analyzing the message here and how it's an argument. It's an argument that's debatable. The fact that we can disagree with what they're saying, it's actually a good thing. Your thesis for this sort of essay should be debatable. You should be able to imagine someone arguing against you. So this is a pretty solid literary analysis essay. They have good examples from the text. They have a clear thesis, even if they go a little too far with like the brainwashing stuff. Okay, that's it for now. Talk to you soon.